Why, hello everybody, it's Histor-Tea Time! Hello everybody, and welcome back to another segment of Histor-Tea Time with your favorite historian, me, Miss Mons. So today we're going to talk about the Battle of the Bulge. And the Battle of the Bulge is considered one of the most titanic clashes of all of World War II. So it's pretty big deal. On September 11th, 1944, the Allies take German territory in the city of, I hope I say it right. I don't know if I do. I'm not fluent in German. Allies have now liberated Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. So this is a huge thing. Remember, the last thing that we talked about was D-Day. So we not only opened up a Western front, but we were taking a lot of territory back and away from the Germans. So Hitler remains in denial and won't accept the fact that the Germans are losing miserably. So Hitler is kind of becoming desperate. He does realize that he needs to recapture a location called Antwerp, which is a huge supply line for the Allies. Hitler decides to make a gamble and attack the Allies for Antwerp, and if he wins, Hitler will be able, at least in his brain, regroup his forces and attack the Soviets. Because remember, the Germans are now being squished between the Soviet Eastern Front and then the Western Front by the Allies. So, keep in mind, his plan completely relies on the weather remaining bad and the element of surprise. In September, we are approaching pretty steep winter temperatures. So yes, this is not the time to launch an attack. Now the Ardennes. Now this is a forest area. The Americans are encamped at Ardennes forest area and are currently using it for training purposes to recruit new soldiers and actually give the veteran soldiers a break. So they, mind you, they're like, I just did a beach invasion, I'm kind of exhausted, and I don't blame them, right? So they're recruiting new soldiers, they're training them, and so the Ardennes is kind of, it's kind of like a haven at this moment. It's really not too active. General Omar Bradley, he's the one that's in charge of the group of the Ardennes forest. Now, winter has arrived, so the soldiers are pretty much hunkering down. They're not expecting a lot of action, and they're just kind of chilling. But little did they know, hallowed historical moment. On December 16th, 1944, at 5:30 in the morning, a ferocious artillery barrage rains down on the Allies for like 90 minutes. And then it's followed by a massive wave of tanks from the 6th Panzer Army. So, this is the initiation in the moment when the Battle of the Bulge begins. So the reason why it's called the Battle of the Bulge, which essentially is a battlefield feature that protects or that projects into enemy territory. So the Germans are fighting to get that. It's like the high ground. They're trying to get the high ground, essentially. So Germans make huge advances and achievements against the Americans, and then they create a massive bulge in the American line. So again, this is territory that they're trying to achieve. General Bradley is actually away in Paris visiting General Eisenhower at the Versailles headquarters. So when they get word of the attack at the Ardennes, Bradley's actually not very concerned, but Eisenhower is actually like, oh, this is going to be bigger than what it actually is. This is going to be a pretty big deal. So he decides that he needs to plan to have reinforcements show up at the Ardennes. Now, due to bad weather, the Allied aerial attacks slightly missed the 1,500 troop trains and 500 trainloads of supplies. So, that means all these German reinforcements are getting funneled over there, and nothing's going to be done. Allies quickly try to make a winter camo kind of, like equipment by painting a lot of their stuff white and then sewing white cloaks to conceal themselves. Now, the SS officer Otto Skorzeny was actually reputed to be a very wicked and very nasty Nazi. He had English-speaking German soldiers infiltrate American lines and actually steal American uniforms and then pose as spies, essentially. Skorzeny launches Operation Grief, and essentially this is where his soldiers are posed as GIs, and they disguise their tanks and used captured American jeeps, and they cut telephone lines and then send the reinforcements in the wrong direction. So the reinforcements that Eisenhower ordered to come to help protect the Ardennes, they got misdirected. So some of Scorzini's soldiers are actually captured, but their job isn't exactly over. So they spread a false rumor that Scorzini is going to Paris and conduct a raid and kill Eisenhower. So of course the Allies that are in Paris place Eisenhower on lockdown, but it was actually a lie. There were no German forces anywhere near Paris. So now we have another Nazi problem. SS Commander Colonel Joachim, possibly Paper? I'm not very fluent in German. His battalion was known as the Blowtorch Battalion because they would literally burn civilian villages with civilians still in them. They were very ruthless people. Now, get ready. Hallowed historical moment. On the 17th of December, 1944, Piper captures 125 U.S. soldiers at Malmedy, which is a little territory. Keep in mind, when you're captured, you're supposed to be spared from the killing, okay? Because you're surrendering. All right, your fighting's over. So, Paper dude, he stated that the American prisoners of war slowed them down. So he orders for their mass execution. This was later known as the Malmedy Massacre. This is going to come into play a little bit later. Americans come upon the corpses later and see their fellow soldiers frozen with their hands up, which is a sign of surrender, showing that they were inhumanely shot and then left to just bleed out and die in the frozen snow. So there were actually surviving witnesses, and they testified, and then they told reporters and interviewers later on, and of course there was footage, there was pictures of it. On the 21st of December, Germans take the town of St. Vith, and they take 8,000 prisoners and move to take Bastogne. Now here, Bastogne is a key territory at this moment. The temperature is -12, and Americans were surrounded by Germans, so a lot of men actually were going insane from shell shock, and a lot of them succumbed to frostbite. So Americans were kind of suffering. They actually in total sustained 3,000 casualties at Bastogne, but they still refused to surrender. Amazingly, the Americans can hold out. And we're ready for another hallowed historical moment. 4 Germans wave up the white flag, and they deliver an ultimatum to U.S. General Anthony McAuliffe. The Germans tell McAuliffe, surrender or we will destroy the Americans, the civilians, and the city. To which General McAuliffe famously responds with, nuts. There's actually a cafe called the Nuts Cafe now. So, fun fact, and that was given to me by probably one of my favorite military officers that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, Colonel Todd Mitchell, who's actually stationed in Germany right now. So, yay! Thank you for telling me that fun fact for my video. Okay, again, I made a meme because I'm 24, and what else can young historians do? So, surrender? I think not. Alright, here we go. Hallowed historical moment. On the 22nd of December, 1944, the weather turns, ironically, in favor of the Allies. The Allies, this actually happens quite a lot in World War II. This happened at D-Day, right? The weather was really bad, and then it just dramatically turned. So the Allies can finally use their air forces and airdrop supplies. They also bomb German supply routes. So Hitler's forces are now sitting ducks. Keep in mind, he based his entire counterattack on bad weather staying bad, and on the element of surprise, because it was in the winter time. He used so many troops, so much supplies, that the Germans are pretty much running dangerously low on supplies in order to hold out and actually win the war. So, in a way, he screwed himself. And it kills me when I hear people that say, oh, Hitler was actually a very brilliant man. He was just evil. No. Yes, he's evil, but he's not brilliant. He made a lot of mistakes. He was a soldier in World War I. He was a foot soldier. He was never a commander. That's not what he did. He gained his power by being basically a pretty influential public speaker. He was not a military commander. He trusted his generals so much that very often that when they also fed him false information, he never questioned it. So it's crazy when you base an entire counterattack on the weather. Weather is not consistent. It can change at any given point, right? You have a gust of wind, you have the heat go up, you have the cold temperatures drop, you name it, it can change the weather at any given point. And that's exactly what happens. And so what's interesting is that the SS officers that are working with Hitler at this time notice that his plans are slowly becoming less and less coherent and making sense. This was a very stupid decision, okay? This was a massive gamble. So, we're going to dive into Hitler's psyche. So, on the 20th of July, 1944, this is way before the Battle of the Bulge, okay? We're going to go back in time. Rewind. German officers were becoming really concerned with his mental state, and so much so that they smuggled a bomb into a meeting to try and assassinate him. Hitler survives, of course. It kills like 4 people, none of them Hitler. This adds to his Messiah superiority complex. So essentially, it was his destiny to survive and see the Third Reich success. Idiot. The assassination attempt was known as the Stauffenberg plot. But Hitler is super paranoid. Obviously, he was paranoid before this, but now his paranoia is just like super amplified, and he actually executes 200 SS officers accused of being involved with the plot. So, did drugs change world history? I told you earlier, in one of the, I think it was like the first episode, it was the surrender of France. The reason why France was taken so fast was because like half of after the German soldiers were all taking meth tablets just repeatedly and just never slept and had no empathy and pretty much were super soldiers. It was like a really terrible version of Captain America. It was so like the Red Skull. There we go. It's like a bunch of Red Skulls running around. So yeah, they were super soldiers essentially on meth. We're going to talk about drugs again. Don't do drugs. Stay in school. So at this point, 1944, this is a year before the war ends, okay? Hitler is addled with drugs and is taking it. He's taking so much. And it's taking a very serious physical and mental toll on him. Hitler's mentality is actually fueled by his doctor, Theodor Morell, who administered daily supplements since the late 1930s and then throughout the war. Hitler becomes increasingly dependent upon his daily injections. He calls it his vitamin injections. However, he's actually being injected with cocaine and Eucadol, which is oxycodone, and so this mix is actually a chemical cousin to heroin. There's actually a lot of poisons that end up going into his drugs. I took notes on that somewhere, but he's essentially poisoning Hitler in a way. I personally I've never found anything that said like his doctor was actually trying to kill Hitler. I don't really know if he was kind of on the side of let's just kill him. That'd be great information for somebody else to go find though. So Hitler's decision-making process is becoming increasingly irrational, which is evident and then whenever he briefed his plans for the counterattack of the Battle of the Bulge. So the Battle of the Bulge was useless. This massive counterattack cost German money, lives, weapons, and a lot of time. Now, I will say this. It did take out a lot of Americans. It took out a lot of Allied lives. But here's the problem. If you don't, it's kind of like what Japan did when they attacked Pearl Harbor and then we swung back at Midway. If you are for certain that you haven't knocked your enemy on the mat completely, and that there's still remaining forces out there, and your plan doesn't have a contingency option, it's not solid enough. And that's why people were like really doubting Hitler. So Hitler's closest confidants were noticing him becoming more jittery, that he's babbling excessively, he's making no strategic sense for military operations. So on the 12th of December of 1944, he calls the meeting to brief the idea for the Battle of the Bulge. But after the assassination attempt, he takes super extreme precautions. So he orders the busload of SS officers being driven to the medieval castle headquarters known as the Eagle's Eyrie. It was his secret Western Front post, I believe, yeah. To be driven around for about 30 to 45 minutes so that the SS officers would lose their bearings. And then they're marched into the bunker beneath the castle. And then they are stripped of all weaponry. So witnesses state that Hitler actually looked around like 80 years old at this time, when he was actually 55. So he was very visibly mentally and physically collapsing. So as Hitler briefs the plan for the Bulge, the SS officers are incredibly concerned. They know that the success rate for this plan is pretty much like 0. But Hitler's SS staff officers could pretty much do nothing. They still agree to go forward with the counterattack later that month, and they were afraid that his paranoia would have them executed if they showed signs of distrust or lack of faith in his plans. So here we go, back to the Battle of the Bulge. 400 men create a roadblock for the German Panzer Division, and the U.S. forces actually managed to hold out. This whole roadblock, and it leads to kind of a battle of attrition now, and it lasted for about a week. And then Hitler once again underestimated his enemy and overestimated the weather. He did respect and fear General Patton, but anyways, that's neither here or there. So General Patton sends his reinforcements of 200,000 troops and rescues the soldiers at Bastogne. So Patton was able to get his soldiers to travel north and cover 120 miles of terrain in just 2 days in the winter. That is insane! Oh my gosh, so much motivation. So Patton establishes a supply corridor to Bastogne. And yeah, Patton to the rescue, literally. He uses this large amount of Sherman tanks to blast through the German flanks into Bastogne. What's known as Boxing Day, 1944, Patton arrives after 10 horrific days of German occupation. The Americans finally push the Germans up to the River Rhine, and in total the Americans lose 2,500 to about 3,500 soldiers. But Germans suffer even more. Piper sets his military equipment on fire and then leads 800 survivors on foot towards Germany since they lost their entire armored division. On the 8th of January 1945, reports warn Hitler that unless he orders a retreat, all of Piper's soldiers will die. Now, here we go. I'm going to give you a little map here. So, Bastogne. This was huge time. This was a huge turning point, okay? This is where the Germans finally retreat. We had the victory, all this German crappy victory. The Americans are finally pushing. The Germans were initially trying to push their line in towards Antwerp because the Americans had all this, because remember, they liberated all this, okay? This was the Malmedy Massacre. St. Vith was a nightmare. But the Americans somehow managed to push in with their 200,000 reinforcements thanks to Patton. So, pushed them out. So Hitler really never allows retreat to happen, but finally, for once, he does. So Hitler and his inner circle evacuate their western front, which was that Eagle's Eyrie, and they retreat to Berlin. Now, the day after Hitler arrives in Berlin, the Soviet Red Army seizes Warsaw, Poland, and then in February, the Soviets cross the River Oder and 50 miles, which is 50 miles from Hitler's bunker. That's crazy. This was a result of moving his best troops from the Eastern Front, keeping the Soviets at bay, and then sending them to the Battle of the Bulge to fight the Americans. This messed up the success rate for the Germans. And here's something not so great. Angry Americans exacted a revenge upon the Germans that they actually captured at Chinon, and they executed all of the German POWs, just like what they did at Malmedy. Now, when Patton was told this, he said it was terrible, but they had to cover it up. So, for a long time, this wasn't even known to anybody that the Americans did this. Again, I do not agree with that decision, but I was not there. Only they were. And that's it. History. Now, interesting fact, after World War II was over and I can't get his name He was tried at the Nuremberg trials, and he actually served 11 years in prison only. Now, after he gets out, he moves to France. However, former members of the French resistance find out that he's living in France, and they assassinate him. So, again, nobody was really that mad because, you know, he was a Nazi, so nobody cares. So anyway, that was the Battle of the Bulge. It was an amazing idea, I guess. Amazingly stupid idea on the German side, but yeah, it was unfortunately a big time of loss for the Americans. But don't worry, we bounced back. So I only have 2 more episodes in my series, and then we're gonna end it, and that's gonna be the end of the World War II series, and then we're gonna start with the Cold War. So that should be pretty fun. Thank you again for watching. Thank you for joining me on another segment of Histor-Tea Time.